And what's happening, guys? This is a Club of the Band 1993 coming at you for another live stream. Yes, this is only the fourth live stream on my channel, and this live stream is going to be a short one. It's just going to be a little bit of a kind of a book review, or kind of a double review also, on Daniel Bryan's book called My Improbable Journey to the Main Event of Wrestlemania. Which this is going to be kind of a double review because I'm going to kind of talk about stuff I learned in both the book and the and his documentary. Just say yes, yes, yes. And as you see, I had my hand right here. And of course, the documentary, if you remember, was signed by Daniel Bryan at the World Wheels Convention back in 2016. So we're going to talk about this. I just want to share my thoughts about this book of what I thought. I just finished reading it about an hour or so ago. I know this is a little bit late, but I actually did not get this book until Christmas this past year. But the funny thing is, too, is I hate books. I don't really like to read. But with this book out, I wanted to get it because, you know, I've understood Daniel Bryan. I've always been how big of a fan I've been since I started watching the WWE back in 2013. So just to review my thoughts on the book, I thought it was a really good book. A lot of the stuff that I remember learning about in when I watched the documentary for Daniel Bryan. So most of the stuff I could probably tie into that. But the book I felt went a lot more in depth on some other things that he talked about in the documentary. So I'm just going to pretty much just review like what he talked about in the book. Most of the first part of the book, he just talked about growing up as a kid. He was born in May of 1981 in Aberdeen, Washington, just a very simple, humble town. He described it. As he's probably mentioned several times, his dad was a log scaler. He had a lot of different interests as a kid, but wrestling actually was one of his early interests also, as he first heard about wrestling when he was in first grade. There was this new kid in school, which is an old friend of his named Abe. I guess him and his one other friend were in a room together one day, and he said, "Shh, I have something in my book bag, but you can't tell anybody what it is." And it was these wrestling magazines, and you know, he just started reading them. And that's what got him hooked on wrestling. He watched a lot of wrestling as a kid. Of course, he was a huge fan of The Ultimate Warrior. I know that. And I know there was times, I remember reading a few times where he did some stunts just randomly while he was watching wrestling in his living room. I think one time he tried to do like a moonsault off of his couch or something like that, and I forgot he broke something. And there, I can't remember exactly what it was, but this was a fun time for him. But then he also talked about how his parents got divorced, and like, you know, they both agreed to go in their separate ways mutually, it seemed like, and they both, you know, eventually got remarried, and they found happiness in their lives, and he was happy about that. But of course, since he mostly lived with his mom a lot growing up, I mean, he spent a lot of time with his dad, though. Him and his dad were always really close, as it was very emphasized. And anywhere we've you know, you've either read or, you know, seen in, like, you know, articles or seen in other little videos. But he was always used to living simply, which means he wasn't really like the richest kid or from the richest family at all growing up either. So I remember he worked like in some newspaper routes. He worked at McDonald's, I know, at one point with his sister, Billy Sue. But of course, also, he was a very shy kid as well. I remember one part of the book, he talks about when he was a senior in high school in his English class, they were going around, they were going to be reading their papers. And when it got to him, he was just someone who just hated reading his stuff aloud in front of the class. And literally, he started reading, and then he said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I cannot do this." And he sat down. So, I mean, I'm just saying, you know, a lot of people think, you know, these wrestlers come from high-class families with all this great stuff. Daniel Bryan was the guy who just normal human like us. He grew up simply. He wasn't really, you know, the richest guy in town. He didn't really work at like any like big fancy business or anything like that. He was just a normal kid who you know, was small and felt at times that, you know, his size was a disadvantage for him. But, you know, he had a dream of being a wrestler, and I believe he said seeing like someone like Rey Mysterio succeed in WWE pursued him to maybe pursue his dream. So towards the end of his high school years, he was originally planning on going to Dean Malenko's wrestling school in Florida, because that was another person who really was like more like a motivator for him to try get into WWE, because he was small as well. But then the Malenko wrestling school ended up closing. And what also stunk was they didn't have his $500 deposit anymore. So that was $500 he lost. And again, Bryan wasn't really the richest man at the time. I mean, he even said there he was only making like $4.90 an hour working at McDonald's. So I mean, that's $500 at that time was a lot for him. But then he ended up going to HBK's wrestling school in San Antonio, Texas. He literally left his home and drove down there like the night he graduated high school. So he went to like a grad party or two that night, and then went home, packed up, and left. And he never really like did any traveling by himself yet at the time. So I think he actually parked in like a mall parking lot or something like that because he got lost and he fell asleep. At the time, there was GPSs. There was just directions you can just print out from MapQuest on Google or something like that. That's how it was at the time. And of course, also not just when he went down to wrestling to HBK's wrestling school, but anywhere he's gone for his first few years, he like didn't really live with like the greatest living conditions either time. So there was times where he literally just slept in a sleeping bag a lot. Like one here and there, he would get a bed or he'd be sleeping on a cot. So it's not like he was like like in some big fancy hotel room or a big some fancy apartment. He was like in a decent regular apartment, but he didn't have a bed. It's just stuff like that just shows that this was a guy who was just always didn't mind living simply and just doing whatever he wanted to. His first in-ring name was the American Dragon. HBK helped him come up with that. He had a tryout match for WWE, which was the first ever match he technically ever had in WWE. It took place in San Antonio, Texas, when he teamed up with Shooter Schultz against Lance Cade and Brian Kendrick, or as we know him today as the Brian Kendrick. They put him on. They had a good match. Of course, Shawn kept pushing to have them all get signed by WWE, and they got signed, and they were sent to Memphis Championship Wrestling, which is, I believe at the time, sounded like it was more of a developmental brand for the WWF at the time. That's where he met the guy he thinks is one of the most influential people in his career, William Regal. And here and there you see things like Regal helped him come up with like an in-ring name. He helped them pick out some ring gear. William Regal did a lot for Daniel Bryan when he was during his whole career, not just when he was in Memphis. But then not long later, I believe it was 18 months later, I can't remember exactly how long ago later it was, but then Memphis Championship Wrestling closed, and they said they were going to be cutting some wrestlers, but the rest, I believe, were going up to the main roster. But unfortunately, Bryan didn't make the cut, so he was fired, and then he went home. And I believe he's starting to maybe go like a community college, taking some classes, just in case if he couldn't get his wrestling career off the ground. And I believe where things finally started to open the door for him and him finally getting all of his big opportunities was when he knew about these Japan tryouts that were like, I think like an hour or two away from where he lived at the time. Because I believe he went back to Aberdeen. I can't remember. Bryan moved around a lot when he was in his early days. I believe he lived in Vegas. He lived in Aberdeen. He lived in San Diego. He lived all over the place. Now I believe he lives somewhere in Phoenix, Arizona, I believe, with his wife Bree, as we all know. But he was for a while going like once a week to these Japan tryouts, and he wasn't really getting anywhere. And someone literally told him one day, like, "Hey, you can't be just coming here just once a week. You gotta be here like a lot more than that." So that's when Bryan made the idea of moving and literally like living at that Japan dojo. But the thing was, he didn't really have anywhere to live. So Bryan literally, again, we go back to talking about him living simply. Bryan literally got a cot and he literally lived in the dojo. He slept there every night. It's just, again, he was always a guy who never really had a ton of money on him, but he always was happy with living simply, simply, because this is what he was used to. So that's when he started being there a lot longer, and he started getting tours. He went on. Bryan for years was on the independent scene doing tours in Japan. He even did some in England. Had some pretty cool tournaments. There was times also where he appeared in a couple of Velocity matches as an extra with WWE, as someone put in a word for him. I can't remember when it was exactly. I remember it was mentioned in the documentary, but he wrestled some Velocity matches. I remember he wrestled Jamie Noble. I know he wrestled John Cena. And then after one of his last Velocity matches in 2005, there was a time where he actually didn't really have too much interest in trying to go to WWE. He was, enjoying being, I think he called it a starving artist, I believe, as he described it. He did enjoy, going on his independent scenes, going to Japan and England. He even spent some time in ROH as well until, like, I think his contract expired sometime in 2009, I believe. I can't remember exactly. I think that's September 2009. But for a while, he didn't really have any much interest in going to WWE. He was just completely happy with doing what he was doing because he was doing what he loved doing. He was making decent amount of money. He was wrestling guys like Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, Cesaro. He met a lot of people who are East Coast friends, and now they're in WWE. And he again, he was enjoying what he was doing. So he went to ROH. I believe in like the mid to late 2000s. He was at ROH and he was champion for 462 days. And then when he knew his contract was getting close and his injuries started, he suffered a couple of injuries while he was in ROH. In 2008, he made a deal with himself that, okay, like he kind of motivated himself to somewhat take an interest in trying to get to WWE. And he decided, like, if he gets there, great. But if not, then once his ROH contract expired, then he was going to keep wrestling, but then he was going to start focusing on life after wrestling as well. But then in 2008, his old friend, who he trained with, as we talked about a couple minutes ago, Brian Kendrick, was at the time starting up this theory of the Brian Kendrick. That was his character. And he was looking for the tag team partner. And Kendrick wanted Bryan to be the tag team partner. But at the time, WWE knew that Bryan could wrestle, but they weren't sure if he could talk. So that's when they flew him in. They did these, I can't remember where it was. And they did some of these, like, auditions, like, just segments, and they found the guy can talk. But then a couple weeks later, Brian Kendrick got fired by WWE. So it's like, oh, okay. So again, he was, getting ready to transition, move back to Aberdeen, Washington. But then a couple weeks after Brian got fired, Brian got a call from, Daniel got a call from that time as we remember as the executive vice president of talent relations, John Laurinaitis, and he got offered a regular contract by WWE. But I think he said that if he would have offered a developmental deal, he would have turned it down. But he got offered a regular contract, and he was going to be put on the NXT brand. It was kind of like, if you ever watch like your Survivor, The Biggest Loser, it was kind of like that, where it was just a season. They were going to have like seasons of NXT, but of course, as we all know, that didn't really go over too well. But Brian actually at the time was the only guy on a developmental brand who was under a regular contract, not a developmental contract. But the NXT days were not really great for Brian, as he was. Well, first off, at the time, a lot of people think that Michael Cole's commentary, because at the time when Daniel Bryan first came along, Vince McMahon wanted to start experimenting with Michael Cole as a heel announcer, and they pretty much just physically attacked Daniel Bryan. He was losing, but Bryan said that he was okay with it because it had a purpose. And he thinks that it was building up the tension between him and Miz because it was a perfect match, as Miz was his pro. Again, the reason why it was such a good match, though, is because Daniel Bryan was a great in-ring performer, but he had no charisma. Miz, on the other hand, Miz is a good performer, but he just wasn't as good as a performer as Bryan was, but he had a lot of charisma. So it was like that bully you had just bullying him around, and Daniel Bryan believing, hey, I have more experience. I've been all around the world. I can be a star on my own. I don't need you. But Bryan was eliminated from NXT, and some of his promo skills at the time still wasn't really too sharp. He was eliminated during the season 1 of NXT, and I believe he was lost of what to say whenever he went back there to the back after being eliminated. And he said, like, Daniel Bryan may not make a name here, but everybody knows who Bryan Danielson is, which is another thing, too. When he got to WWE, he wasn't allowed to continue wrestling under his real name of Bryan Danielson. He had to pick a different name just so he can it can be licensed by WWE and make it its own. So he suggested some names. I know 2 of them actually were Buddy Peacock, because his dad's name is Buddy. Or people call his dad's name was Donald, but people called him Buddy. And Peacock because of the wrestler Steve Peacock. But then this one was weird. He wanted to use his middle name and have the last name of Boner, Lloyd Boner, which is a little odd. But then William Regal actually suggested, why not Daniel Bryan? That's a strong name. It's pretty much your name, like reversed for the most part, pretty much. So he eventually went with that. And after season 1 ended, which the winner was Wade Barrett, they were called to come to Raw. But no one was allowed to really know. They thought they were doing like a photo shoot or something. They wasn't sure. But that's when they did the Nexus debut. It was in a match with John Cena and CM Punk on a Monday Night Raw for the WWE Championship. And the Nexus debut pretty much just destroyed everything. It was pretty much the Nexus taking over. As John Cena said in the documentary, it was a bunch of guys that were just pretty much told to go out there and raise hell. And that's what they did. However, though, Bryan was trying to be as vicious as possible, but there was some things he didn't know he wasn't allowed to do in the PG era. Like the two things he did was everybody pretty much like was mainly targeting John Cena in that beatdown. And Bryan literally just like, got in Cena's face and said, "You're not better than me." He spit in his face and kicked him in the skull. And then later he I believe he took Justin Roberts' tie, the ring announcer, and choked him with the tie. So there's two things right there that you're not allowed to do in WWE, which is both choking and spitting. So when I go to the back, they thought it all went good, but someone said, who spit and who choked? And Bryan said he did both of them. So at first they pretty much gave him a warning, but then the people would say here and there, like, "Oh, what'd you learn, Daniel? What'd you learn? What can't you do?" So he thought no big deal. And people kept saying he's fine, don't need to worry about it. Well, a couple days later, he got a call from Vince McMahon, and he said, "I really didn't want to do this, but I had to do it to set an example. You've been released from your contract due to what happened." And Daniel was pretty much fired, but he told Vince that, "Hey, you're pretty much doing me a favor. I'm going to go make a lot of money elsewhere." Because Bryan didn't really enjoy those NXT days because he was doing all these goofy stuff that's like he's there to be a wrestler, not for like a reality show. That's just not what he wanted to do. But he was pretty much even though John Laurinaitis called him later and he said, "I did not know that Vince was going to fire you. He just called me like not too long before he called you, and I just asked for your number." But he said, "I probably wouldn't. You probably shouldn't have said that to him." But Bryan and his the guy who was booking him when Gabe, I can't remember what his last name was, when he was on the independent scenes, he said, "We're gonna make money here," and Bryan booked some independent scenes. A couple months later, he got a call asking if he'd be interested in coming back to WWE. He was going to be the surprise 7th member of Team WWE at SummerSlam when it was Team WWE against the Nexus. Bryan accepted. He was brought back as a surprise. And it was ironic because The Miz wanted to join Team WWE, but they chose Daniel Bryan instead. Had a strong showing, but then they continued his feud with The Miz that they're building off of from NXT Season 1. And he won the U.S. title off of The Miz. And things were looking pretty good. He actually was going to be a pro for NXT Season 2 with Derek Bateman, but I believe Season 2 kind of fell through. I don't know exactly what happened, but who cares? Because that time NXT was just a complete joke. And then he got involved in some really strange storyline with the Bella Twins, which that's actually where he first met Brie, which he said if it wasn't for Brie, for this, we probably would have never met. It was a strange storyline, and don't quote me wrong on this, but I heard rumors that apparently Vince McMahon only put this story together because he thought, since Daniel Bryan is a vegan, he thought it sounded like he was saying virgin. So it's pretty much the Bellas like fighting over who was going to sleep with him first before because they thought he was a virgin, even though they was more so making fun of the fact that he was a vegan. If that's wrong, I am sorry. Please don't come after me. But that storyline ended when the Bellas walked in on him kissing Gail Kim, which was supposed to be his girlfriend. So that was a weird storyline. And then he was supposed to have a rematch for the U.S. Championship against Sheamus at WrestleMania 27, which was a couple moments where, as Brian describes it, him and Sheamus, like, they worked well together. They were really close friends, but they had some really frustrating moments as wrestlers. And WrestleMania 27 was all. It was supposed to be Bryan's first WrestleMania. They were told there was an 80% chance their car would be on the main show. At the last second, it got bumped to the pre-show, which eventually it was supposed to be a lumberjack match, but then it just turned into a battle royale for the U.S. title, which Sheamus retained. But even though through all this time, that storyline with the Bellas was what got him and Brie together. They became really close friends. As far as I know, they started to, hang out, and I believe it was Valentine's Day. Brian was dropping her off at the house, and I guess they were talking for a while, and Brian took it as, they were just having friendly conversation. Brie was more so waiting for that kiss goodnight on Valentine's Day. And as he drove away, I guess Brie texted him saying something like, a gentleman would have kissed a lovely woman goodnight or something like that. He said, told me to come back. They came back in the rain, shared their first kiss. That's when they officially started going out. Apparently a week later, they were trying to get intimate for the first time in a hotel room alone. And I guess at the time, it seemed like his traveling buddies were both Sheamus and Ted DiBiase Jr., and I guess they saw them go into a hotel that night. They were drunk and they lied and said that they lost their room key. So they pretty much barged in on Daniel Bryan and Brie Bella doing adult things, as Daniel Bryan would say in his book. So very unfortunate, but just thought that was, something to say. But then, of course, that's around time where he was starting to not really get used much. He was scheduled to be in Money in the Bank for the SmackDown contract in 2011, which would be the contract to cash in if you wanted to cash in on the World Heavyweight Champion. But at the time, the plan was for Alberto Del Rio to win the Raw Money in the Bank, and they wanted Wade Barrett to win the SmackDown. But they kept going back and forth because they thought that would be a little too similar, seeing that two villains would be winning Money in the Bank. So it literally came down to the day of the pay-per-view. They were still leaning towards Wade Barrett, but then they also considered maybe Daniel Bryan or Cody Rhodes. But then they gave it to Daniel because they didn't want both contracts to be taken by heels, which I think at the time if I was watching, I wouldn't care if Wade Barrett won. I probably could have given him some help since he didn't really recover much from the Nexus angle. So he won that contract, but as Daniel said, it was like wah wah wah, because there wasn't really much build to him actually winning the Money in the Bank contract, and he was a little worried that people wouldn't take it as seriously with him winning it because he really hadn't been winning many matches. He wasn't really on too many shows that much, and after he won that contract, they just didn't really know what to do with him. There was times I think he came out saying he was going to cash in at WrestleMania, but as Brian said too, there was just times in his career where things just happened from just a strange incident that happened. And one of them was actually when he first won the World Heavyweight Championship. He had the contract, and then at the feud that happened most of the fall, I believe, was Big Show and Mark Henry feuding over the World Heavyweight Championship. And there was a pay-per-view called Vengeance 2011 where Big Show and Mark Henry did this big suplex and the ring collapsed. And so everybody started cheering for Bryan to come out and cash his contract, but he couldn't because he was at home and they didn't bring him to the pay-per-view that day. And again, he just thought after a while that maybe he's just going to cash in one day and he's not going to, get it. And how are you supposed to make me strong from this? But then it was a week before Bryan cashed it in, and Mark Henry suffered some type of ankle injury. And Mark Henry's time was getting a big heel push at the time, so I don't think the plan was him to ever lose the title. But since he was hurt, they didn't want to keep it on him for this long. So they were trying to think what to do. He was feuding with Big Show, and they thought, well, to make it a little different, why don't we just have Bryan cash in the contract on Big Show, and we'll go from there. And it was more of a convenience because Bryan was only at the pay-per-view he cashed it in at first because he had a Kmart signing with Kelly the day of the pay-per-view. But if he wasn't there, he's not sure if they would have gone with that plan. So Bryan cashed in on the Big Show. And, of course, he was a little confused at the time. Like, okay, am I supposed to go more with, a heelish character here? Which slowly transitioned Bryan to more of a heel role. But people were still behind him. And actually, when he won the World Heavyweight Championship, that's when he started doing the yes chant, because he was told to pretty much just act obnoxious and act like he just won the Super Bowl, which is what he did, and the fans just were just getting over this whole yes chant. So he had matches with Big Show, Mark Henry. He had a triple threat match inside a steel cage with him at the Royal Rumble. He then defended the title again at Elimination Chamber, and then he was supposed to have a match with Sheamus at WrestleMania 28. It was supposed to kick off. I thought we were going to get like 15, 20 minutes and kick butt. He got this special ring gear to that he had ready because WrestleMania, people like to go all out on their ring gear. I remember he said when he got them, there were these type of like stones or something on his kick pads, and he thought, oh, I can't use these, they're going to hurt. But then he didn't know that it was at the time that when he ordered the gear that it was going to be an 18-second match, which he didn't really need in the end. But of course, as a lot of people say, that match is what made him, because it made him like the ultimate underdog, and people just got really behind him. Like, even the next night, he was not on Raw, but he came out in a dark match, and people were still chanting yes. So it felt more like he was a face, even though he was still a heel at the time. So it was strange. He went on to have his rematch for the World Heavyweight Championship at Extreme Rules with Sheamus. So they got to pretty much just have the match they weren't then get to have at WrestleMania 28. And of course, that's when he lost help. But then he got involved in this feud with CM Punk, which those matches were really good. I'm sorry, I just bumped my chair thing right here. And then, but the story that I got kind of a crack out, I don't know why, was at his match at Money in the Bank 2012 against Punk, where special guest referee was AJ Lee. He was going. When he first heard about the 18-second thing, he thought, okay, how am I going to adapt my character from this? So he thought that he was like a little more like crazy and like unhinged, kind of like an anarchist, as he described it. So a comic artist friend of his, Jill Thompson, he had this gear design, some like type of like military jacket with like this blood on the back of it. Some like thing that's make him look like crazy or something. He had the jacket, but then but that's before he even knew the fans would fall in love with his yes chants. So when he got it, he's like, it's not going to fit his character anymore, but he still wanted to wear it because he thought it was nice, but he didn't get it approved by the WWE itself. And he thought that they're not going to like it anyways, but he says, I'm still going to wear it anyways. So at Money in the Bank 2012, he wore it out there. Of course, you see him, he does kind of look like a little bit of like a cranky man, pretty much with it on. And then I guess during Punk's entrance, one of the producers came up to him and says, Vince, take the jacket off. And Dean Malenko was the producer, and I guess he really got chewed out apparently for Brian doing that. So, yep. And then after his feud with Punk, which remember in CM Punk's podcast, Punk mentioned that if Punk did not agree to turn heel after that feud, Daniel Bryan would have taken the title off of him at that time. But that's not what happened. And they put him in a feud with Kane because they felt like it was intertwining with the feud they had for No Way Out, when it was a triple threat between Punk, Bryan, and Kane for the WWE Championship. And it was more this feud where, AJ Lee was also being smitten. That's where AJ was like really crazy. She had like a different guy every time you turned around. She was Daniel Bryan. She had something with CM Punk, John Cena, Kane, all the people. But at the time it was with Bryan and Kane. And that's when AJ became Raw General Manager or SmackDown General Manager. I can't remember which one it was. And that's when they decided to do this whole anger management vignette thing. And of course, it's one of the things at first where you think like, I don't know, this will be okay. But the crowd like really got into this vignettes. And then there was a time where they had to go out and they had a 10-minute segment. The crowd was going to vote for become a tag team, match, or hug it out. And the crowd voted hug. And they had like a 10-minute segment where they were trying to hug each other. It was so childish, but it worked. The crowd just loved it. And that's what led to Team Hell No, which that's where Daniel Bryan and Kane, or as Daniel referred to him in the book as his close friend Glenn Jacobs, really got over. And that's when they became really close friends. They teamed together. They feuded with Team Rhodes Scholars. They teamed up with Ryback at TLC that year and feuded against The Shield. Then of course they start teasing those tensions back and forth, and then wanting to win the title, but just keeping them just these crazy people. But it worked so great. They teamed together for 8 months, I believe, which was, it was only supposed to be just for like a month and then go back to feud each other. But with how good it was, they teamed together for like 8 months. They were tag champs. They dropped them eventually to the Shield at Extreme Rules in 2013, and I forgot. I guess there was some interview I heard some about where they started kind of the idea that Daniel Bryan's the weak link of Team Hell No, and he was out to prove that he wasn't the weak link. And he had, in the beginning of summer, he kind of had like a just like a television Raw feud, a little bit with Randy Orton trying to prove himself. And that's when that match, I believe it was in June 2013, where he suffered that neck injury doing a suicide dive, and the match was called off, which Triple H made a decision. But Bryan, like in real life, was personally pissed because that was a match where he was really going to cement himself and like really like help him push him as a singles competitor. So that's when him and Kane decided to go their separate ways. At the time, I guess the rumors have it that I guess at first they were going to do Daniel Bryan versus John Cena at Money in the Bank, but with how high the stakes were that John Cena thought this match could be, they waited till SummerSlam. And also, just to rewind back a second, Daniel Bryan first did not want him and Kane's team to be called Team Hell No. He wanted it to be called Team Friendship, but people thought Hell No would be good because at the time Daniel Bryan's trying to get the fans to chant yes. He'd be like, no, whenever he come out. But Bryan was like, okay, so we're kind of more of like a team like for like kids, but why would the kids want to buy a shirt with us that says hell on it? That was his little gripe about it. But then, anyways, fast forward back to 2013, he continued to be pushed up to the top during that summer as a main star. He had a match with Cena at SummerSlam in 2013. That's the match where Triple H turned on him and Randy Orton cashed in on him. And that was his whole thing with the Birthday Authority. Daniel Bryan's a B-plus player. I mean, again, it's fiction, but it was pretty much reality, pretty much being all tied in at the same time. And it just worked so well because of how over he was with the crowd. So then he feuded with Randy, which were okay matches in the fall, and then they put him in a feud with the Wyatt family, and they had him join the Wyatt family at the end of that year. And I originally there was rumors that this was supposed to be like a long-term thing, and he actually got geared specifically designed for him being a Wyatt family. I think it's gonna be more of a long-term thing, but ended up only being 2 weeks. And then he had his match with Bray, which was a really good match at the Royal Rumble that year in Pittsburgh, my hometown. And when he was in the back, he knew that fans were not going to be happy that he was going to be in the Royal Rumble, and he felt bad because they booed Rey Mysterio when he came out. So then, of course, that was around the time where Vince McMahon sat him down and wanted to tell him his plans for WrestleMania. And Bryan was hoping either Triple H because of the whole authority angle, or he thought maybe Shawn Michaels, because Shawn Michaels was a special guest referee at Hell in a Cell, and Shawn screwed him over thinking, okay, well, this is more of a teacher against student match, this could be good. But then Vince told him he's supposed to wrestle Sheamus. For the third time, we could have seen Daniel Bryan and Sheamus at WrestleMania. But so that was originally the plans. But then things changed because originally the card was supposed to include Sheamus and Bryan, and then Triple H was supposed to fight CM Punk, and then the main event was supposed to be Randy Orton versus Batista. So CM Punk quit the Royal Rumble, as we all know. So that left like kind of like two little uh-ohs. As the first one was, okay, who's Hunter gonna wrestle? And then they're trying to think, how on earth are they gonna have this main event between Randy Orton and Batista and have people enjoy it? Because no one liked either one of them at the time. They just didn't like. I wouldn't say it's more so them. Orton and Batista had their fans, but they didn't like the idea of the match because it just made no sense pretty much at the time. And of course, they were going to just throw this whole authority story with Daniel Bryan away, as the story was just so perfect to have a main event WrestleMania. So that's where they decided to do the thing. Okay, and even Triple H was pushing to wrestle Daniel Bryan that year at WrestleMania. So Daniel Bryan, um, Daniel Bryan would then get back involved in the storyline. He did the Elimination Chamber match. He and then the build towards the Occupy Raw segment, which was just unbelievable. I remember watching that. He occupied Raw, trying to push Triple H over the edge until he accepted his challenge at WrestleMania, and at that if Bryan wins, he gets added to the World Heavyweight Championship match. So there would be a triple threat match. And he accepted, and that's, of course, when you know Triple H did the angle where he handcuffed Bryan, beat him senseless, thinking he would make it to WrestleMania, which he did. And we all know that story what happened there. Daniel Bryan went on to WrestleMania. But, of course, he was sharing how it was funny because it was a stressful time, but it kind of wasn't – there wasn't enough time for him to be stressful about it because he had, all these media appearances, all these signings. Him and Brie had their wedding they were planning that they thought was a good idea for like the week after WrestleMania, which made it even crazier. And of course, like his proposal with Brie and his wedding, they wanted to actually film that so that way it could be part of Total Divas. But the locations they had to be changed up, and it was just kind of like all over the place. So things got settled out, but the thing he said that actually stressed him out the most about preparing for WrestleMania was his gear. He was trying to get like some more fancier gear, and as I said earlier, he had that gear design from when he was joining the Wyatt family, which I believe he kind of used some of it, I think, for WrestleMania. I'm not sure. And he said actually it was the only time in his career he did not take William Regal's advice. Just like staying simple, he just felt like he needed to do something more. So he did that, and then he did WrestleMania 30, of course. That's when he started to show Triple H. Triple H did the angle afterwards after Bryan beat him, where he beat him senseless again, that he wouldn't be able to win the title. And he won the title, and he just celebrated after that. He got married to Brie that following Friday. And you'd think this book would have ended on a happy note, but it kind of ended a little bit on a sad note. But I respect Bryan for how he ended it because he talked about his dad at the end of the book in the epilogue. He talked about how the best week of his life, him main eventing WrestleMania, of course, he considers the best day of his life, the day he married Brie. They went on their honeymoon to Hawaii. They got back on a Saturday. That Monday, literally right when he was getting ready to go to Raw, he got a call from, I can't remember who it was. It might have been his dad's wife, Darby, saying that his dad had been still in bed and he wasn't really breathing. He was taken to the hospital where he died unexpectedly at the age of 57. And Bryan was heartbroken because, as I said earlier, Daniel Bryan and his dad had a really close father-son relationship. And he had actually not seen his dad since Christmas of that year. He shared how his dad came out and dressed up as Santa. And he said the last time, and he mentioned this too in his retirement speech last February, that the last time his dad got to see him wrestle live was the Raw in December, the go home show for TLC, where they're doing that championship assignment thing, or whatever the heck it was called, and the audience literally hijacked Ross in Bryan's hometown. And then he saw him Christmas, and then his dad was not able to make it to WrestleMania or his wedding because Darby was sick with pneumonia. So that was it. And he said, he loved wrestling, but the thing he regrets most about wrestling is the fact that he wasn't able to spend as much time with his family, especially the fact that he thought that after he was done wrestling, everything would be there whenever he come back. And unfortunately, the one thing that meant most to him, his father, was not there. So Daniel Bryan and that's how he ended the book, talking about the death of his father, which, again, a little sad ending to the book, but well respected. But overall, this is just a very good story to enjoy. Again, coming from a guy who doesn't really like to read books, I wanted to read this book right when I found out it came out because, I'm a huge fan of Daniel Bryan. And, of course, everything tied into his documentary, I learned a little more about some things more in depth in this book. And I probably will end up reading this book again. I mean, it's a really fun book. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend checking it out. So that is it, guys, for this live stream reviewing the book of my Improbable Journey to the Main Event of WrestleMania, Daniel Bryan's Biography. What did you guys think of the book, if you read it all? If not, please read it. Leave your comments down below. And as always, please click that like and subscribe button for more content to come to this channel. Please follow me on Twitter also at TheManAirboy93. Stay tuned later on tonight as my friend Daniel Guys and I will be doing 2 live reviews on his channels for both Raw from last night and SmackDown tonight. Should be a lot of fun things to talk about, as last night's Raw was great. SmackDown tonight should be great as well. So please stay tuned for this channel to watch that as well. And to stay tuned for more content to come to this channel as well as always. And with that, guys, I will see you all later. Have a good day. And if you're watching SmackDown tonight, enjoy.